Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. Hello, America, and welcome to episode 17, entitled Navigating Personal and Righteous Judgment. Yep, does that seem ambiguous? I'm not sure. A couple of things prompted this episode, and we'll get into those things, but I'm just going to jump right in. I got pages and pages of notes here. So navigating personal judgment versus righteous judgment. We live in a world of endless opinions. I have plenty of them. Everyone out there has opinions on things. And the things that, how do we discern among those things what we are mostly applying our biases to versus some kind of standard that we form an opinion against, or philosophy or faith or whatever? How do we come to our opinions, for one? And then, in what fashion are we not imposing, but sharing those opinions? And based on those opinions, are we being judgmental? I don't know. We'll see. We're going to kind of juxtapose. Now, when I say Christianity and Christian faith, understand that I'm speaking as an individual. I am not a biblical scholar. I'm not even that smart on the Bible. I can do some research here and there. Yeah, so understand that Edgar Mills does not speak for Christians when I'm speaking from a Christian perspective. That's just my own Christianity speaking, right? And then we're going to juxtapose the Christian sort of perspective versus the secular sort of perspective based on, ancient philosophies or academia and things like that. And we're going to we'll see how it goes. So let's clarify, right? Personal judgment comes across most of the time as hypocritical, right? And kind of self-serving. There are people out there who just love to criticize other people or love to put other people down. And those people, yes, often are hypocrites. So that's kind of straight off the bat. When I say personal judgment, that's immediately, it kind of goes negative straight away. We're all very quick to point fingers without checking ourselves, So, and then on the flip side of that is the righteous judgment. That's about legitimate discerning right from wrong based on, biblical principles or just philosophical principles that are from a place of humility, right? And fairness and things like that. So the righteous judgment is usually more positive, I would say, in the sense that it's meant to help either change a way of thinking or to help you get out of a hole, to help in general, right? In a positive sense, versus the personal judgment where it's meant to just critique and bring you down. Sort of from a Christian lens, personal judgment, everybody, even non-Christians, right? People who have never gone to church have heard somebody say, you should remove the plank from your own eye before you pick the speck out of someone else's eye. Well, that's from the Bible, obviously, right? And yes, that's true. But that being said, we all got specks and planks in our eyes. Even though we're not perfect, if we see one of our friends and homies and loved ones going in a bad way, we can help them. But it's about avoiding the hypocrisy, folks. It's not about whether or not you're pointing out something that's potentially harmful. It's about because you should point out things that are potentially harmful. But it's about avoiding the hypocrisy. And that nothing burns me up more than hypocrisy. Because none of us, folks, not one on this planet of Earth, is without sin from a biblical perspective. Now, if you're a hedonist and you whatever, and you don't recognize sin as sin, that's fine too, but there are things that are bad, and you have to derive your sense of right and wrong from somewhere. And usually those are found in biblical truths, whether you strayed away from it or not. That's usually the foundation of most of our value systems here in America. From a secular perspective, though, it's kind of more about a moral philosophy, where if you pass personal judgment on somebody, it's usually some kind of prejudice or bias that you're passing off, and it's usually, like most things, rooted in some kind of emotional reaction rather than sort of a well thought out, logical, reasoned, ethics based observation. And if you're thinking in a utilitarian sort of way, where judgments are kind of weighed on the outcomes of a thing, right? Well, was me boozing and drinking and driving home bad? Well, I made it home okay and nobody was hurt, so it was okay. But self-interest creeps in because we do know that's bad. But then we're saying, but everybody was okay. It's kind of flawed decision making when you look at it from that perspective. And again, the moral decision making process that does have a foundation somewhere else. Kind of we don't ignore sort of an overall equality or fairness when it comes to passing judgment on people from a secular perspective. Back to righteous judgment. The Bible tells us not to judge by appearances, but with righteous judgment, right? And what that focuses on is truth to help to restore somebody to their faith or to protect somebody from going further astray. And whereas in secular sort of thought process or ethics, righteous judgment is kind of likened to principled moral discernment when it comes in philosophy, right? Where judgments are kind of duty, but like it's our duty to judge based on justice and fairness without any personal vendettas, right? Taking our own personal vendettas, our own personal biases out of it. So though it be biblical or secular, there's still sort of very, very similar lines of thinking when it comes to righteous judgment and when it comes to personal judgment. So there's a lot of Muldoons out there who are very judgmental. And I say this a lot, in the special operations community when I was in the military, there's a lot of judgmental dudes. You know what I mean? These super fit dudes that they do all these things and they're super fit and they're good looking and they got the awesome eating program and, they did whatever, man, superheroes, some of them like to be judgmental. A lot of them like to be judgmental. And then, you know what? Never mind that. Religiously, man, some of those folks are very judgmental and it ain't righteous. It ain't righteous. It's very much a I'm better than you sort of mentality. And that's no good either, folks. That's no good either. The I'm better than you thing, that's not something to flaunt or to flex on other people. That's something to be held. If you genuinely believe you're better than somebody on the foundation of fitness and lethality and intelligence, that's great. But what should your, not judgment, you shouldn't be passing judgment. If you're that great and you're that awesome, it's kind of your duty to help people get to where you're at, right? Anyway, we're not necessarily talking about individuals here. We're going to talk about some movements a little bit, some of these activists and kind of leftist organizations. For those of you who don't know, and I say this on nearly every episode, I'm a libertarian by politics. I have equally strong critique of both sides of the red and blue, but I do have a particular disdain for Marxism and the communist ideologies, and those usually fall on the left side of that aisle. But again, I also hate the hypocrisy, and we see that on both sides of the aisle, but it's very magnified on the red side of the aisle. So now we're going to look at and we're going to juxtapose tolerance versus acceptance versus support, and kind of bat these off of Christian and secular perspectives. And these words get thrown around a lot: tolerance and acceptance. And support is kind of cut and dry, right? But tolerance versus acceptance. They get thrown around a lot. But those words are not interchangeable, good people. Those words are not interchangeable. There's a difference, and there's a significant difference. And here's how I'll explain them while trying to blend faith-based kind of insights in with academic philosophies. Just in general, the definition of tolerance is basically it's putting up with something that you disagree with without interfering while still being engaged, right? It's not necessarily about not taking a stand or being wishy-washy or being lukewarm on a thing. It's respecting the differences that you have with someone else. And without you endorsing those differences, you don't have to necessarily like a thing that someone does, but you tolerate things that in your mind, and you should tolerate things, and the metric on when you stop tolerating those things is is that strong enough to compel me to part ways with this other human being? Now that's a pretty heavy metric, right? But especially family members. If they do a thing that you don't like and it kind of conflicts with your faith or it conflicts with your moral fiber and you think it's wrong, but this person you've known and loved your whole life, is it strong enough for you to cut ties with that person? And if it's not, then guess what? You should tolerate what that person's doing. And we'll get to it here in a second. I know some of you are asking already, well, why don't we help change these people? We tolerate a lot of stuff in our life already as it is, right? And there are things worth taking a stand on. There are many things worth taking a stand on, in my opinion. But I'm kind of talking about personal relationships right now, friendships, relationship, family relationships especially. Is the thing that this person does intolerable? Is it a thing that you would rather part ways with this person and cut ties rather than tolerate their behavior or their whatever idiosyncrasy it is? Yeah, think about that. Now, you know what? I didn't plan to put this in there, but I'm going to put it in there. When I was young, I'm not going to say how young, and I'm not going to go into great detail on this relationship. But when I was young, I had a relationship with a black girl. And also when I was young, my dad, God rest his soul, my dad was a bit of a racist character. And now I happen to know that my dad was not truly racist in his heart. But yeah, I kind of came up, there was racism, right? My dad came, I was back and forth with my mom and dad throughout my youth. They divorced when I was young. But my dad came over one day unannounced when I had my black girlfriend at the apartment. And I got news for you folks. We were doing what young people do. And my dad he was trying to peek it because I just cracked the door. Hey Dad, what's up, man? What are you doing? Yeah, it was an awkward moment. But guess what? My dad loved me, right? He tolerated what he saw as wrong. And now that was wrong on multiple levels, but it wasn't because she was black, for sure. It was because we were young and unsupervised. But in my dad's mind, he was disappointed that I was with a black girl, which is ironic. And I'll get to that story on another podcast. Okay, so at any rate, that was just a little personal anecdote there. I'm sorry. Let me pick up where I'm at. Is what the person is doing enough for you to break contact with them and that you can no longer tolerate it? There has to be a high standard for that, especially with family members. That's my opinion on that. That's my opinion. So putting up with something that you disagree with without interfering while still being engaged, right? So from a Christian perspective, the term comes to mind And you've all heard it before. Love the sinner and hate the sin. I mean, that to me is correct. And what's one of the biblical sort of examples there is Jesus, he was hanging out with tax collectors, but all the time telling them they needed to repent, correct? So you can do a thing at some point from a Christian perspective. I mean, you have to repent, and you have to have a realization that the thing you're doing is bad and understand why, and make a solid choice not to do the bad thing anymore. And as a Christian, as you are sort of loving the sinner and hating the sin, you have to mind yourself, because the way you react to things has a big impact on how that's going to play out. As the Christian, all right, as the calm, cool, and collected one, you need to be humble, and you need to be patient, and you need to bear with, especially your family members, out of love. That is what the Bible calls for. That's it, out of love. And I'm not going to mention the word grace again throughout this, but there's kind of a thing within the church and the Christian community and all. There's churches that want to show grace to everyone, which is fine. But some of them cross the line into acceptance of not the individual, but the behavior, right? And the Episcopals come to mind on that. But I don't know enough about that to carry on. So I'm gonna stick on my script here. At some point, you got to draw the line, though, right? At some point, grace becomes like an endorsement, and you can't do that as the church. You can't do that. From a secular perspective, philosophy kind of defines tolerance as conditional acceptance. You're bearing with something with different beliefs, emphasizing sort of neutrality, like not taking a stand on the thing in the name of peace. You know what I mean? Social peace or peace amongst yourselves, depending on who it is. The Stanford Encyclopedia frames it as putting up with practices without interference to foster cooperation despite disagreements. So it's the same. That's what tolerance is. You don't care for the practice, but you're going to put up with it to maintain the peace, to maintain some cooperation or some other mutual benefit. In family, for sure, you need to be tolerant, but also often in business, right? You'll tolerate someone, or at work, you'll tolerate a policy or a person or a certain behavior just to keep the peace, or for mutual financial gain, or simply not to get fired because you may be the minority on that. And, academics, the philosophy and ethics, secular ethics, sort of see it as a sort of a virtue to be tolerant and for the peaceful coexistence. Now, again, tolerance doesn't mean indifference, folks. You can have an opinion about a thing but you can still make the deliberate choice to put up with that thing just to maintain harmony, right? Again, you can have the opinion and the idea about a thing, and at some point, for some people, there's a breaking point. And when they break, they've made that decision that this is no longer tolerable. And then they cut away, and that's your black sheep uncle or aunt that you haven't seen for decades because, your mom and your uncle got in a fight or whatever. Or you just break with a business. My mom once quit a job. I'll tell you now, my mom was a lesbian. She came out when I was about 17, I think. And my mom, for those of you who know me and who knew younger me, I'm a very aggressive, very confrontational person. Well, I get all of that exactly from my mother. And she was the champ. She was a hard woman, and she was a champ, and she was ready to fight, pretty quick on things. And anyway, my mother, she worked at a prominent auto auction, and she was like the man standing next to the man. She was like number 2 for that auto auction. And it was it was a good job. She made a lot of money. and she enjoyed doing it, and she did it well. The boss, she was the man next to the man. Well, the man made an off-color lesbian joke in my mom's presence one day, and that ended that. That ended that relationship. That ended that job because she MF'd him up and down, cursed him out every which way but loose, and packed her stuff and beat feet. And that was my mom. That's how she did business. She didn't tolerate a bunch of bullshit. She didn't tolerate it. Yeah, she didn't tolerate it at all. And they tolerated her. Everybody knew she was gay. The boss knew she was gay. He thought he was being funny, I'm sure. He thought he was being clever and cute. Yeah, she wasn't having it. So we tolerate things to keep the peace. We tolerate things to maintain relationships, sometimes just for mutual gain. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay to be tolerant. You should be tolerant. And you should have a pretty, wide berth there. Now we're going to go into acceptance. Now this steps it up a notch, right? It's accepting a thing. You're no longer just tolerating it and not interfering, right? You're now affirming a thing or normalizing this thing. And that's a slippery slope from the Christian perspective, because now you're at risk of kind of approving and endorsing sin if you accept something, right? And this is where we get crazy with the church and the gay community, because the church biblically, yes, homosexuality is a sin. The church says that marriage is between a man and a woman. Now, I'll refer you back several episodes to my opinion. Well, I don't care that a man marries a man or a woman marries a woman if it's according to whatever religious beliefs you have. I believe that marriage is a religious institution, not a state institution. So if you go to some bizarro church, if you go to a Wiccan church, now look, yes, do I think that's you're sinning and all that? Yeah, sure. But look, who am I to judge? That's what we're here about right now. But to me, marriage is between whatever spiritual or religious or whatever. I don't care if you go to a shaman out in the middle of the woods somewhere. If that shaman, if you guys smoke the peace pipe and get naked and do whatever, and he says you're married, you're married. If you believe you're married, as far as your faith goes, whatever that faith is in, to me, you're married. It's semantics, in my opinion. And the Christian faith, which I'm a part of, yeah, your marriage is ordained by God. Unfortunately, still, I had to go to Georgia to get a marriage license for some reason. Unknown to me still. Now, if you're a statist or if you work for the state, please reach out. Tell me the reason why Georgia needs to issue me a marriage certificate before I can get married. Yep. Where am I? I lost my place, man. I go off on the state sticking its face in where it doesn't belong. Okay, as a Christian, okay, yeah, here we go. This is where the gay community and the Christian community bump heads, is to accept, for Christians to accept. Now it's almost like you're turning a blind eye to what you know to be blatant wrongdoing. And here's the trick, though. Again, folks, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a theologian. All right. And I strongly lean on the New Testament, and I strongly lean on specifically the words written in red. Jesus accepts people where they're at, and then he guides them, pushes them even for transformation. He loves them and sticks with them, and they may or may not come out of their sin. In most cases in the Bible, yes, they did. If you want to be a real Christian, right? If you want to be a real solid, rock solid Christian, you can accept people where they're at without belittling, without blatant, biased judgment, and simply, and the way I think to do it, now this is just Edgar talking, is you live your example. You simply live your life, and it's okay to occasionally, hey, look, yeah, Christ loves you. you should consider, and then move on. You don't need to chastise, you don't need to finger point, and you don't need to all that stuff. You don't need to do that. We all know God works in mysterious ways. We all know that. You be the example. Don't be the judge, jury, and the prosecutor. There's only one ultimately who's going to do that, right? From a secular ethics, views acceptance as a full-on endorsement, right? That's a full-on integration, approval of the differences that, and this plays out, in politics a lot. Yeah, it plays out in politics a lot. But what it does though is when you go into full-on acceptance of a thing that you disagree with or secretly inwardly know to be wrong. Damn, excuse me. Something you inwardly know to be wrong. Now you're blurring moral lines, right? If you're now accepting a thing surface level and allowing these things to carry on that you know to be wrong. Because those things, as they gain steam, whatever thing you think is wrong, and let's use the example of the LGBT community in the 80s and 90s. Well, let's say 80s, and back then when there were very vocal Christians saying that, oh, if you let this slide, and if this becomes normal, pedophilia is next. Well, guess what, folks? You can like it or lump it, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I'm telling you right now, pedophilia has become prominent or more visible anyway. And not only has it become more visible because of the internet and things like that, there are people out there, and I wish I could remember this lady's name, who now wants to classify pedophilia as a sexuality and not blatantly wrong and harmful to children. Now we could do a whole nother podcast on maturity level and physical readiness for sex and things like that. But yeah, there are people out there calling for the normalization, the acceptance of pedophilia, using the LGBT community as the stepping stone, or the civil rights as a stepping stone. Now, I think most of us will agree that pedophilia is flat out wrong. And no matter if you're the whatever bizarro religious rituals from whatever bizarro religion, if there's kids involved, they're doing it wrong. I'll tell you that right now. And if that's got to do with some bizarre stuff like removing foreskin and consuming it, or whatever bizarre crap that is, that's wrong. You gotta stop it. You can't do it. And I'm usually like live and let live. I don't even want to get into the circumcision thing, because if you say it's okay for a parent to make a decision to transition a child under the age of majority, but especially an adolescent, or if you say that's not okay, then you got to wonder, why is circumcision okay? I mean, they're not removing the genitals, but they're certainly doing a thing that the kid don't like. And I don't know, there's studies talking about the trauma that goes along with that. That's deeply embedded in the brain. Because obviously as an infant, you don't remember that stuff. But do you though? Did it leave some kind of deep trauma? Was there some kind of literal chemical reaction in your brain from the amount of pain from some dude cutting off your foreskin and shortchanging you? You know what I'm saying? I got shortchanged. All right, man. Damn, I got off on a rant. Kids, pedophilia, bizarre religious ritual involving children. No, none of it's okay. And if you think it is, please, by all means, if you have some kind of what you think is a legitimate academic argument of why it should be okay for adults to have sex with children, by all means, hit me up, Edgar Mills at ospreyshootingsolutions.com. and I will try my best with an open mind to hear what you have to say. Chances are you're probably just mentally ill. And already I'm condemning you, right? That's already turning you off. Look, if there's someone out there listening to this who thinks that, I'm going to listen to what you have to say. I will listen to what you have to say. All right. All right. Blurred moral lines. Acceptance, right? Acceptance. Do we have to accept a thing we don't like to maintain harmony? No, we don't. It's usually in our best interest to tolerate things because we're a free country and people should be allowed to do the things that they want to do as long as they don't infringe upon other people, right? As long as they don't hurt other people and take their stuff, as long as there's no coercion involved in some bullshit cult to where you mentally manipulate people or drug people or whatever to get them to follow your path. As long as there's no coercion, yeah, we're a free country. We should be able to do anything we want. If you want to go worship the trees, go worship the trees. I happen to worship God. You may worship, I don't know, what's some of these other ones? A Buddha. You may be a Buddhist or some of these other ancient sort of, or Hindu or whatever. And I think still, in my mind, you're wrong, but that's okay. We're free to do that as long as you're not harming other people. Now, we went from acceptance and we're going to slide into support, folks. Support. Now, this is outright promoting and enabling a thing, whatever that is, facilitating it and helping it to thrive and survive. And I mentioned Episcopals earlier. I want to say, they claim to be Christians, I think. I'm not too up on this and I don't want to drag people through the dirt, but I think they perform gay marriages in the church. I think, and the one I'm thinking about specifically, well, there's two that I'm thinking about specifically. One is in like the Virginia Highlands, I think, and then one is up near Morningside Drive, I think, or Cheshire Bridge, up Piedmont, somewhere up there. There's a church, pretty close to Fat Matt's Rib Shack. That's the one I'm thinking about, and I think they do like gay marriages and stuff like that. Now, Atlanta has a huge gay population, for sure. But is that in line with biblical truth? Is that in line with biblical truth? And I don't think it is. Well, I know it's not. Let's see. Christians are called back to truth. Yes. So when it comes to support, like at some point, yes, Christians do have to stand firm. And when we don't see this, by the way, this happens in foreign countries. I want to say in Syria right now, good people, Christians are being murdered systematically in Syria. In Africa, and let's see, Congo, Central Africa for sure, up in that region anyway, Cameroon maybe. Yeah, Christians get murdered all the time. And nobody bats an eye. Nobody seems to give a crap. And this ain't like, and look, folks, you're like, well, you shouldn't be over there anyway. This ain't white missionary Christians, white bread Nebraska Christians going over to spread the gospel. This is Africans who have been Christianized, freaking decades ago. And they're getting murdered systematically. And nobody cares. Christians are called to back the truth and back the word of God. And I know there's interpretations of the word of God, but generally speaking, there's sort of an overall sort of consensus. And for Christians, it's all about acknowledging and standing on God's design versus your truth. And I'm doing your truth in quotation marks. There is no your truth, folks. And I know that's a young generational thing. I don't know about millennials, but the Generation Z folks, I know there's a your truth out there. There is no your truth. There's your circumstance. But just because it's happened to you, don't make it the truth. Trust me on that. There's your circumstance. From a secular angle on that, philosophy sees support as an ethical sort of advocacy, right? You're acknowledging that, yes, this is right and okay, but only if it's still, kind of aligned with like, there still should be, from a secular angle, you're still looking for things like justice, right? Any blind support of anything is bad. any bad, anything that you don't know all about it, right? If you support a thing you don't know all about, and then those little fine prints get in there, those little secret dark spaces start opening up a little bit, and you realize you've aligned yourself with a thing that is horrible, and you've enabled some very wrong and very bad outcomes, then that's going to erode the societal or the greater good, which from a secular view, that's what, and especially from kind of a leftist view, it's all about the greater good, right? The greater good, the ends justify the means. What is it? Social contract. So if you just outright, from a secular perspective, if you just blindly support a thing without knowing about that thing in great detail, whether it's a lifestyle or a philosophy or a activist group or whatever, a political group, when bad things start happening, that is not for the greater good, that starts to erode the greater good, you're complicit, man. So you need to know about these things, not from a Christian's perspective, but like what is the end goal here? How do they achieve what they claim to want? And a lot of these political activist groups that popped up during the spring, what was the Arab Spring? Remember that in 2014 or so? And then that began the sort of it's okay to riot decade. It's okay to riot and destroy things. When you align yourself with groups like that who are maybe started out as grassroots, but then just got taken over by big money interests, and you're out looting and destroying property, and you can't even say why. I mean, you're not a thinker at that point. So there is a responsibility, folks. Even from a secular angle, you do have a responsibility to know what you're supporting and to ensure that support is in fact for the good of our society. All right, man, that was a lot of stuff there. So how do these things play out in real life? And I've alluded to all these things. Friendships or family. How do these play out? Have you been in a situation where you're at odds with somebody and you tolerate them? Do you have a friend? Do you have a close friend who's like an alcoholic or a heavy drug user, and they're off the chain, but you love them, so you don't want to participate with that, but you don't want to let them hurt themselves either? Think about that. Does that exist in your life? How do these things play out in friendships or public policy or business? One thing that comes to mind, you guys remember, I don't know, man. It kind of comes in and out, it's off and on, but back several years ago, Chick-fil-A made some public statement about traditional marriage or something like that. And then the LGBT community lost it. And we're going to boycott Chick-fil-A and all those things. Yeah. I mean, sure. People say vote with your dollars, vote with your feet, you know. And if you don't want to support a place that is not all in for you, that does not fully support your whatever, yeah, that's your right to do it. Is it correct for you to try to burn them down? And I don't mean physically burn. I mean like to try to ruin their business. Is that correct? Is that a correct response for them just saying, I believe in traditional marriage? Maybe not. Or retail stores, and this was similar time frames, maybe a little later, with I want to say it was Target or somebody who was doing all this transgender like youth stuff. And that was, there's half the population that was aggrieved by that. And the same holds true. Do we need to burn Target down? Do we need to destroy Target? No, you vote with your feet. You vote with your dollars and see how it plays out. I don't need to slander Target. If somebody got me on, if Fox 5 Atlanta, hey, can you say your name? Hey, yeah, I'm Edgar. So what do you think about Target? I don't shop at Target. Yeah, it wouldn't be a very good news interview, would it? Yeah, I don't shop at Target. That's it. Or I do shop or whatever. Now, throw a twist in there. What if they approached you and you're a gay man? You go, "What do you think about Chick-fil-A?" And you go, "I love Chick-fil-A. It's awesome." Then you'd piss off half of your community or more. That's why we got to stop putting ourselves in these big teams and these big tribes and start kind of getting back to the individual, working on our individual merits. Am I a good person? Am I gay? Maybe. But am I a good person? Am I polite? Do I interact with people? Do I behave like a civilized human being? Am I productive at work or school or in my art? Do I create great things? Do I build great houses? You know, we need to get back, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. All right, I'm going to get to that in a minute. What else? When you're on these tribes and you have to believe the party line or you have to toe the line or be excommunicated from your tribe, and you have that it's all or nothing sort of mentality, you're either an ally or an enemy. Man, that's just such a negative, bad way to do business, to be, because you're cutting off literally half of the population that could potentially be an ally, if not for your cause, for you as an individual, right? I have a few clients that are transgender, and they're genuinely good human beings. And I don't support a lot of things, but I don't necessarily, I tolerate and even accept them for sure. And to the point that I care about their well-being. I care about their well-being. I mean, physical well-being, mental well-being, their emotional well-being, their financial, all these things. I genuinely care about them, and I disagree with kind of the sort of a lifestyle. In their mind, that they are what they are, and probably in their mind, they're living their truth. I consider it to be their circumstance. However, I hope I don't lose friends over this, but that's the way it is. People who I've become friends with, regardless of whatever their tribe is, or regardless of whatever their, bizarro activism thing may be, I genuinely care about these people. So in friendships, you tolerate differences. You accept people for who they are, but then you only actively support what you see to be right. But what you see to be right for your friend, as well as biblically, as well as, you could try to guide them to Jesus, but don't, if they refuse, then so be it. It may happen one day. It may not. And that's from a sort of biblical perspective. As a sort of non-biblical, sort of secular perspective, is that you need to balance your relationship with, kind of mutual growth. You want to see your friends improve in whatever aspects of their life. My best friend, Timmy, I want to see him be successful at everything he does. I want, you know what I'm saying? I want his family to thrive. I want his work to thrive. I want him to be healthy. And I want that for people, everybody that I know. I don't wish bad things on any of my friends. And as far as public policy goes, we talked about Chick-fil-A and Target a little bit. You got to balance like people's rights. And as a person who's trying to exert your uniqueness on people, right? Don't go around demanding acceptance and support. That's how you get cut off. And some people, just out of principle, when in America, right, we are rugged individualists to a very large degree still, even though I'm talking about pioneer days. If somebody demanded a thing of you just out of blanket friggin' principle, F you, right? And I'm almost that way now. But as a secular philosophy, and when it comes to philosophy, and when it comes to business, when it comes to things, it lines very much up with the libertarian sort of perspectives on non-coercion, right? Non-aggression, sort of neutral laws. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Don't coerce. Right? That's it. So promote tolerance, no matter what team you're on. You should be promoting tolerance. Now, I hate to keep going back to the left. The left is not very tolerant of the Christian community or whatever. And they like to say, and they like to exaggerate, and they take the worst examples. Well, and look, the right does this too. They'll pick the worst examples to highlight as a norm. And that's kind of disingenuous, folks, to pick the worst possible examples to call the norm. And the example I'm going to bring up is, what's the name of that damn church? Was it in Arkansas or somewhere? And they were in the news a lot. Not Fultondale? Is that? No, that can't be right. That sounds like my buddy's church. That's not correct. There's a church, and I can't remember the name of it right now. And they'll hold signs up that says God hates fags. And then and I think one time when soldiers were coming back, they were something about how soldiers were murderers or something like that. Probably under the Barack Obama presidency. Yeah, they were very vocal, but they were very hateful. That is not in line with Christianity, folks. That's just not in line with true Christianity. And then Christians take the worst of the worst scenarios, like pride parades in San Francisco, for instance. People are out openly having anal sex and urinating on one another in the public. And there's kids walking around, and and it's egregious from a Christian perspective. It's egregious. And these poor kids. And yeah, I agree that the kids shouldn't be exposed to that. But also these parents are allowing their children, these parents are exposing these kids to that consciously. So they're not raising their children as Christians for sure. And if they are allegedly raising their kids as Christians, and then they're seeing grown men urinate on one another, and they're saying, "Oh, see, we have to accept them as they are. We love them because we're Christians." That is absolutely wrong. But that is one of the worst examples that I can think of, that the Christian folks that's normal homosexuality. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's correct. All right. So we're moving on here. We're moving on. Is there a duty for Christians sort of publicly addressing sin? Now, and I'm not talking about the guy standing out on the street corner with a sign that says repent. That's a public display. He's a Christian, and he's simply standing there, letting the Lord work through him, right? There's nothing wrong with that at all. What about ones who are aggressive? Are they like the one I described earlier? I wish I could remember the name of that friggin' church. If you got somebody shaking their finger in your face, telling you that you're going to hell because you're a piece of crap because you XYZ, that's not in line with the Christian principles, folks. And I don't think Jesus, now look, Jesus went hard on some Pharisees, you know what I'm saying? And the money changers and whatnot in the temple. He went hard. Yeah, he went hard. But ain't nobody out there on the streets these days Jesus. Yeah, you ain't Jesus. All right, I ain't Jesus. We can try to be Christ-like, but try to be Christ-like without the biases that you throw into it. You know what I mean? Boy, this is getting crazy. I might get some hate from a bunch of people on this. I don't know. Christians, in my opinion, me as a Christian, I believe it's important that you do have to balance love and truth while remembering that nobody's perfect, to include yourself. You have to remember that nobody's perfect, to include yourself. In my opinion, there's nothing worse than a hypocrite. You have to remember no one is perfect, to include yourself. I don't think you have a Christian duty to go out and condemn, the sinners, whoever they are. I don't think you're wrong for doing it, as long as you're doing it out of humility and love and just telling God's truth. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And likewise, there's nothing wrong with being an LGBT whatever, and if somebody, you don't, do you have to wear, is there a mandate for LGBT community to self-righteously proclaim their sexuality out in public, loudly and proudly? Is there a mandate for that? Or do you do it just out of spite? I think the Christians, as well as the gays, as well as everyone else. Somewhere, I want to say in Seattle, there is a statue on some state property of like Moloch, or one of the things that the Satan worshiper, the Church of Satanism, or whatever it's called. They have a statue dedicated to this beast, this Satan worshiping sort of thing. Completely, folks, completely out of spite. We all know that this country was not built on satanic ritual. It was generally speaking, built on Christianity. But out of spite, with loopholes and various rules and this and that and the other, there's a statue. But what these people and what all these various groups don't, they're leaving out the balance, right? They're leaving out the subtleties and the nuance, and it's all just big, ugly, brute force things. And most of it, the big, ugly, brute force things that you see out there in the wild, is usually very self-righteous. From whichever side you're coming from, it's usually pretty self-righteous. And that's bad. That's no good. That's no good. What is a biblical mandate? What is the biblical mandate? I don't know. Warn lovingly. I think somewhere in the book of Ezekiel it says that. Restore gently. Let the Holy Spirit convict. Not you. Let the Holy Spirit convict. And then the last thing, I'm gonna read this piece. This is not the last thing. Warn of consequences, but God alone condemns. Yep. You can be the gentle warning, right? You can be the gentle warning, but God alone. And I'll say this about what I think my Christianity is, and I'll just leave it at that. Publicly, yeah, you can speak truth to glorify God and protect others, but do it with love. Publicly. Privately, speak truth to glorify God and protect others, but do it with love. You see what I did there? Do the same thing in private that you do in public, and vice versa. Consistency matters. Consistency matters, good people. All right, what are some of the counterpoints to what I've talked about? Is if you stay silent on a thing, that might imply that you approve of said thing. Now, you may be just biding your time to speak up or looking for the right window of opportunity, but sometimes people take silence as compliance. But what if you're always out there spouting off outrage nonstop? You're always spouting outrage and victimhood and prejudice and bias and bigotry nonstop. That just hardens people up. That just what's the word I'm looking for? Acclimates them to where it lacks any impact. It creates fatigue. And ultimately, it kind of creates the boy who cried wolf effect to where nobody's listening to you anymore. If every time any little thing goes not your way, and you yelling homophobia and racism and bigotry and Christian oppression and whatever, eventually nobody's listening to you. So in reflection of everything I just talked about thus far, there's a thing to remember, a couple of things to remember. None of us are without sin. None of us are without sin. Do in public what you do in private, and vice versa. Be consistent about the way you spread your beliefs, and treat people with some good manners. All right. Now I know this is going a little long, but there's three examples of real world stuff that I want to sort of examine a little bit. And what we're going to do is break these down into personal judgment analysis from Christian secular sort of perspective, and then we're going to do the righteous judgment analysis with a Christian and secular perspective. And first, we're going to start with, you all remember the case, and I bring it up now, of the baker in Colorado, Jack Phillips, who back in, I can't remember, 2015 or 16 or something, refused to make custom cakes for a same-sex wedding based on his religion. And then not long after that, out of spite, I believe, someone who was transitioning wanted him to make a custom cake for their transition sort of celebration. And he refused. And this guy literally has been in court for 10 years. Sorry for that. This guy has been in court for 10 years defending himself. But one of the things is that he's been, well, his defense is based in his faith, right? So the kind of personal judgment analysis on that from the Christian perspective is that if you're not a Christian, you could be looking at him as being a bias or whatever, but he was not hypocritical about what he did. And I don't think it was applicable that he ignored his own sins while condemning LD. He didn't condemn anyone. But the critics looked at him as sort of being divisive and having no grace, right? And the Christians that did drag him, that he has no grace. But there was no clear evidence of that, and he did what he believed he should. The secular sort of side of that is if you show any prejudice, especially if it's arbitrary, right? It kind of clashes with the anti-discrimination sort of norms that, especially in Colorado, exist. And refusals to serve certain people. Now, we've all seen the signs in all sorts of restaurants and businesses that says, we reserve the right to refuse anybody business for any reason. And as a business owner, I think you should be able to do that. Now, if that stated reason is on your color or sexual preference, that's one thing. But if that stated reason is because it violates my religious views, well, then now we got a different story going on. So these weren't just his willy-nilly personal views. He didn't just not like lesbians, right? He was standing on his faith. The righteous judgment and from that, is that from a Christian angle, he upheld what he believed to be God's design. He was not going to celebrate or help to celebrate or support and enable same-sex wedding. He didn't. That's what he knew not to be biblical truth. Now, one of the things that shows that this guy did act with some grace is that he did offer services to them, but he wasn't going to make a special cake for them. Like, he had cakes and stuff like that already made that they were welcome to buy. Anyone's welcome to go in there and buy a cake. But he had to stand on not celebrating the purpose of that cake. So, and that cost him for a while. And people wanted to, now that being said, half the population started going there a lot, and then the other half boycotted. And the reason I bring this one up is that all the charges finally got dismissed from this guy. So he was found to be correct and right in his actions. Secular view on the righteous judgment there is that as an individual, and he was an individual business owner, you are free to exercise your beliefs however you choose while not infringing on someone else, balancing his religious liberty against equality. And the academic studies see it as ethical stewardship, right? Ethical stewardship. Hey, I'm not going to allow you to violate my beliefs. I'll meet you halfway, and they didn't want to meet halfway. So what he was doing did not cause a broader harm to other people. And ultimately, he kind of acted in a neutral way. Now, from a libertarian's perspective on that, and no matter what service, for whatever reason, you can't be compelled or forced to give your labor to another person. You can't be compelled to give your labor to another. They call that slavery, folks. If I'm forced to do a thing for someone else, outside the norms of doing business, that's indentured servitude. And you can't compel somebody to do that. So that was an interesting one because it lasted for so long. And obviously Christians jumped right on board, and obviously the gay community jumped right on board and with condemning this guy. But one of the things I think that worked in his favor, quite honestly, is once this lesbian couple sued this guy, and then they tried to pile on, right? They're like, oh, we're going to destroy him legally. That was not in good faith. They didn't go in that store wanting a transition celebration cake in good faith because they already knew what the answer was. So to me, that killed their credibility on that. Tell me what you think about that. I believe the judgment was correct. I believe that this guy should not be compelled to do a thing that didn't align up with his moral religious beliefs. That's what I believe. All right. The next subject I want to talk to was not an incident. In fact, it's a guy that his name is Maj Toure, and he is the owner and founder of Black Guns Matter and the Solutionaries. And his whole thing is he pushes minority gun ownership and training, and he promotes empowerment through firearms education and other basic skills education in the urban communities via Black Guns Matter and Solutionaries. Why should there be any judgment here? What is the rub? Why do I think that there is some kind of judgment that exists? Well, I've listened to plenty of his interviews and stuff like that, and I see it kind of in the South. Now, I'm not gonna, it's subtle sometimes, and sometimes it's a little less subtle, but I see it in the South. Is the thought, generally speaking, of a 20-something-year-old black male with a firearm scares the living shit out of people. Because a lot of people, not all, kind of lack the critical thinking to not either blanket judge or blanket assume that this guy's gonna commit crime or do whatever. And the hood gets overlooked on a lot of things when it comes to especially firearms. Self-defense training. Yeah. So why would there be any judgment? No, essentially racism. It does still exist, folks. And just because it shows up more subtly sometimes, it still exists. And because I've seen it with the way black clients have approached me, very sort of not trepidatious, but softly, like, hey, can I come out and train? What do you do? And this and that, thinking I'm going to somehow shut them down. And then I've seen it kind of firsthand at some gun stores, not around here, just some gun stores where, black guys will go in looking at guns and everybody gets all nervous and starts focusing on them and things like that. Now, in contrast, I'm going to say a thing. You can call it racist if you want. I was at a gun show in Marietta, and when I say at a gun show, I had a table set up, sort of promoting my business, and next to me was a table of dudes that had a bunch of guns, and they had all their guns out on the table, but they had like a huge setup, right? And there was only two of those guys, and like four young black guys came in, kind of in a group, and they all kind of went over here, and they were looking at different guns, and then they kind of spread out. And they got their attention, and one of the dudes grabbed up a gun, hauled ass toward the door, and then the other dudes ran out, and they got caught in the parking lot. But my point is this: that kind of shit right there kind of exacerbates, and it's what I said earlier about Christians and the gays, how they will choose the most extreme example and use that as sort of a blanket judgment. Well, this was an extreme example. And these dudes, that was a big ball move because they were on the second floor of the thing, and there were cops at all the entrances of the damn place. So they got rolled up in the parking lot. Pretty funny. Anyway, my point is this: not every black guy that comes in the shop is trying to steal your gun. So how do we look at that from the Christian perspective? If Maj Touré is acting in a selfish way, and he's ignoring like the cycles of violence in the hood, and he's not calling for accountability, then he's kind of being a hypocrite. That's a personal judgment sort of way to look at that, even as a Christian. If he's ignoring sort of blatant truths, then he's being a hypocrite. But if his focus is on education and individual autonomy and individual agency, then that's not the case, is it? And I think that's what he's doing. And then the secular sort of personal judgment on that is, again, sort of similar. If he's overlooking systemic issues and ethical critiques of the kind of gun advocacy, he's not just going up in the hood and throwing out free firearms and then taking off, you know what I mean? But he's not, there's no personal bias there. There's personal buy-in. He cares about what he's doing for sure. So I think in the sort of the personal judgment, I don't think he is being selfish in this way. Now, from the righteous judgment, from the Christian perspective, what he's doing fits well in with sort of justice and self-defense, restoring communities, right? That's what he's trying to do by using education, by having and grace, because his classes are free, and he speaks for and to basically oppressed people or underrepresented people in the gun community. And he teaches them, and he's teaching responsibility. That's what every gun instructor should be teaching, is accountability and responsibility. Never mind like levels of proficiency, right? We're talking about the responsibility of owning a firearm and carrying one around on a daily basis. And from a righteous sort of secular angle, he's advocating for equity, right, among the inner city population, now mostly black, but he doesn't differentiate. It's not only for black people, right? He's countering racist sort of gun control history, because if anybody knows sort of the history of gun control, it was in fact rooted with some heavy racism. They did not want freed slaves owning guns. That was it. And on up into the civil rights movement, they didn't want blacks owning guns. And he brings a lot of academic perspective on minority rights, and he frames it in, responsible empowerment, and his own, and promoting social justice through education. So that may or may not have been a bad example. I wanted to say that though, because one, I want to promote what he's doing at Black Guns Matter, and I just want to acknowledge, yes, there's some racism out there. People look at black guys with guns differently than they look at white guys with guns in some places. That's all there is to it. And is it right, wrong, or otherwise? Well, if it's based in bias, then it's probably wrong. All right. And then the thing that got my attention also recently. Now, the Baker situation, the reason that popped up is because that case was just dismissed. And Maj Touré, well, I follow him, so I'm kind of always tracking what his stuff is. And then the next thing that has just popped up on sort of mainstream news is this Chip and Joanna Gaines situation. And if you don't know Chip and Joanna Gaines, they do like the TV house building stuff. I can't remember the name of their show. They got a couple different shows now. And so the controversy is that one of the shows they got now, like their newest show, it features 3 couples. I think not off-grid living, but something like that. And one of the couples is a gay male couple. Yeah. And now Chip and Joanne are famously Christian. Yeah, they both went to, I want to say they both went to like Baylor in Texas, which I think's a Christian school, right? And then they promote Christianity and they talk about it on their shows and stuff. Well, I want to say Franklin Graham of the Samaritan's Purse and Billy Graham's son, he made a statement And that statement was something, I don't think it was that controversial, and I don't think it was that tough. And I don't think Chip Gaines responded to that. But then all the comments, and then all the fans and everybody starts piping up, right? And he started getting ripped for promoting homosexuality and stuff like that. And then Chip kind of comes back with a sort of heavy critique of, I don't know, Christians, really modern Christians, because he said, kind of hypocritical. And when a gay person or a non-believer, for the first time they come into contact with somebody, a Christian, and then all this hate, right? So his harsh critique could kind of be seen as kind of ironically hypocritical, right? Because he got critiqued harshly, and then he turned around and started critiquing harshly. Now, I don't think there's a single problem. Well, first of all, they're in the TV business, and there are certain realities to life. If you're in the TV business, there's going to be gay people. That's a reality of life. If you do business in the city of Atlanta, you're going to serve gay people. That's it. I'm not even in Atlanta. I'm in Rome, Georgia. I'm about a solid hour northwest of Atlanta, and they may not like that I mention their name, but Atlanta Peak Pistols has been out here a few times to train firearms. It's just, that's the way it is. And for him to come back and harshly, that assed up some of the Christians. From a secular perspective, he kind of biased discourse if he's elevating his personal beliefs over sort of inclusive dialogue. That's a way to look at that personal judgment wise. So on his statement, I think is what we're really talking about, is he was kind of elevating his personal beliefs and kind of slamming other Christians. But in the modern world, what he's done in the secular world, what he's done is nothing. I mean, it doesn't even warrant a response. But they also emphasized biblical truth on that. I think they, at some point, whether it was on the show or in the Twitter or the tweet or the friggin' X or whatever it was, they kind of emphasized love and dialogue and restoring through grace and avoiding hypocrisy by encouraging humility. They did that, I think. And then a secular view of that is that it's a principled expression in public discourse. So those two men who are married, they have rights too. They don't necessarily have a right to be on a TV show, but they did all the things that they had to do to get on that TV show. And, I haven't seen the show. I don't know if they're all leathered up and doing stereotypical things, or if it's just two regular guys, trying to live their life. So, depicting faith on modern media is a whole nother thing, man. Like, that's a whole nother thing. And sort of navigating the ethics of that while still having entertaining television. Yeah, I don't know, man. It started a conversation, though. I can tell you that. So those are the things I wanted to kind of go over and give you some examples and let you mull those over. Yeah, we shouldn't be very judgmental, but we are. And if we are judgmental, I think we need to be, when I say critical with it, I don't mean in the negative way. I think we need to critically think and to critically examine why we believe what we believe. And then once we're happy with that, then we need to critically examine how our opinion matters to whoever it is we're judging, right? Because if you're just judging just to feel superior, stop what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? If you're just judging to feel superior, stop what you're doing. If you have a genuine desire to help lead somebody to Jesus, in my personal opinion, Edgar Mills' personal opinion, the best way to do that is be an example of what good looks like. And that will And if you care that much, right? If you care that much, then that will you will hold yourself accountable, and you will be mindful of the things you do under watchful eyes. But like I said in the episode, what you do in the public, you should also do in the private, and vice versa. So if you're mindful of how you appear, and if you're mindful of not being a hypocrite, right, being consistent, then what you do in private and what you do in the public eye should match up. And if you really do genuinely care about leading people to Christ, then be Christ-like. Be kind. You don't got to go around kissing everybody's ass, but be kind to people. Be genuinely kind in a sense that if you see somebody needs help, help them. Hold the door open for people. Pick up trash as you see it when you're walking into Publix. I mean, just any little thing. I mean, I don't even want to. There's about 8 million things you could do in the public eye that would, cause somebody to look and go, oh, wow, that was nice. There you go, man. Set the example. And in military parlance, lead by example. Yeah, do what you want your subordinates to do. Be who you want your friends to be. Yeah, there it is. Now, let me go ahead and do a disclosure and a caveat. I am in no way qualified to talk about Christianity and quote. Now, I had a lot of biblical verses on here that I didn't read out. I don't want the general public to think that I'm spitting off some references that I don't. Yeah, they're written down on a piece of paper. I got like 5 pages of notes here. Maybe it would have had more impact had I read the verse and the book and verse and all, chapter and verse. But I'm in no way a theologian. I'm in no way trying to lead you. Well, yeah, I do. I want everybody to meet Jesus. Yeah, for sure. Why not? I want everybody to be saved. I want everybody to go to heaven. And you can think that's a simplistic, thing if you're a atheist or agnostic type. But it's not. It's not. There's plenty of not even the Bible, right? But there's plenty of scientific evidence, at least for the existence of Jesus Christ. And I happen to believe he is the Son of God. So that's a pretty big deal. It's been around for a while. If that's your metric for religion, how long it's been around, then, there's other religions that probably predated it, or at least some cultish things. That's not the metric at all. At any rate, do what you know is to be right. Now, if you're an atheist or agnostic and you have very definite beliefs about what is right and what is wrong, ask yourself, where do you derive those beliefs from? Was it just was it comic books? Did you read Marvel Comics and that's where you got right from wrong? Did you watch Andy Griffith on TV as a youth and that's where you set your values from? Shit, it's possible, it's possible. Andy Griffith was a good one if you if you want to look at wholesome, that was pretty wholesome. Where do those values come from, folks? Where do they come from? What values do you hold and where do they come from? Now, I say this all the time too. If you lack empathy and you don't care about humans and you just see somebody dead as not, then you are possibly a psychopath and should seek out some counseling. But generally speaking, if it bothers you to see someone get hurt, if death matters to you, if somebody dies and you feel a genuine sort of pain or emptiness, but you're not following Jesus, then ask yourself, where do I get my values from? Where do they come from? Now, the big answer is probably going to be, they're Judeo-Christian values. Well, yes, Judeo-Christian values. I guess that's a big blanket term. But it's worth looking into, folks. It's worth looking into. Do you have integrity? And if so, why? You see what I'm saying? Start asking yourself some deeper questions. Do you have integrity, and if so, why? And how does that look on a daily basis? Yeah. Yep. All right, folks. That's been my That's been my podcast on judgment and tolerance and acceptance and all those things. Was it weighing on me? No. But this is one of those topics that you could sit at a pub and discuss for hours and hours and hours. There's so many different directions you go to when you start talking about your value system and the things that you tolerate and accept and support when it comes to bigger philosophies or when it comes to behavior and things like that. So I think these are things worth thinking about, folks. Think about what your opinion on the Chip and Joanne saga is. Are they promoting homosexual marriage because they had two gay men on their show? Was the baker in Colorado a bigot? Or is he allowed to stand on his beliefs? Are you allowed to have your belief system, but he not allowed to have his? And then the question is, well, if his system doesn't bake me a cake, then his system's wrong. Well, that's not for you to say at all. Was he wrong? If you're in a gay community, was he wrong? Tell me that. Hit me up. Edgar Mills at ospreyshootingsolutions.com, or you can do it from the website, thejuntopodcast.com. If you don't know about Maj Toure, MAJTOURE, and that's Black Guns Matter, or the Solutionaries, both of those. If you live in the inner city, the ghetto specifically, and you care about your community, yourself, your longevity, your self-defense, or learning skills, and not just shooting, folks, life skills. He teaches life skills, how to lift yourself up. All right, that's what he's there to do, is to help you learn how to lift yourself up. And if you got money and you believe in that sort of thing, then donate to the guy, because all his classes are done for free. It's a nonprofit, and when he raises enough money, he'll go do a big class, and not just shooting, but stop the bleed and things like that, among other things. Yeah, what is your opinion on all these things I presented? All right, I do want your feedback, folks. Okay, so there's that. That's the end. Now, what's coming up next? On Saturday, this coming Saturday, what do I have? We have a wild card day. Yep. Let me fix my calendar here. Wild card day. And that's a good one. That's like $75. And it's about a 4-hour day. It could go longer depending on how many folks come out. But bring your rifle and your pistol, because you never know what's going to come out of the deck. And then we run the Blackjack 33 challenge, which is a 2-gun challenge, which is your opportunity to win the coin, a Blackjack 33 Club coin. And the catchphrase on that is performance is the price of entry. Yeah. And that's a good one. And go check out the backstory on that on my website, ospreyshootingsolutions.com. And then it's just a bunch of private sessions. Now, next week, there's availability, folks, for next week, the last week of July. There's plenty of availability for the first week of August. There's a rifle workshop coming up August 9th, and that is strictly rifle, and that's going to be where we just hone down on a couple of fundamentals and do a lot of repetitions supporting those fundamentals. I've got a private consultant. And then on 23rd of August, we will have another pistol workshop. Unlike the last workshop where we worked at distance, we worked all the way out to, I think, 55 yards with pistol. It was an eye-opener and it was awesome. But it sucked hard. A heartbreaker it was. On the 23rd of August, we have a pistol workshop, and that's going to be mostly movement-oriented. Front, rear, lateral, kind of explosive movement, moving in and out of positions, in and out of shooting boxes and that kind of thing. And then at the end of August, on August 30th, there is another wild card day. Now, look, folks, you may notice that I don't have a lot of big courses lined up. If you have a group of 4 or more people that want to do a private course together, like the dynamic pistol or dynamic 2-gun or whatever, hit me up and ask me about that. We can set it up, and we can set that up. in the middle of the summertime, it's brutal, and an 8 or 10 hour day out on the range is pretty brutal. So if you want to do a private thing, we'll do it. Otherwise, the workshops and the wild cards are what's on deck for the foreseeable future. And once again, in September, I'm looking to set up a land nav course, and I'm waiting on the original crew who set that up to hit me with some solid dates. But once I get those solid dates, we are then going to open it up. And I want to say we're going to have 4 slots open for that land navigation. And that's going to be a 3-day. That's 1 day in the classroom, 1 full day. And then we'll do a terrain walk and all that stuff out here. And then we will spend 2 days in the Talladega National Forest. So that's an overnighter. It's brutal. It's going to be a team event, which means it's going to be 2-man teams is what that's going to be. I provide all the gear, folks, compasses, protractors, pace beads, maps, map cases, the whole works, water, and then we'll go out and get a nice chow after that. So please follow, please share, please like, all those things. OspreyShootingSolutions.com, 2teamguys.com, and thejuntopodcast.com. And then I'm on the socials on all those things, except the Junto Podcast is, I want to say it's the Junto Podcast 1727. And then 2 Team Guys and Osprey Shooting Solutions on Instagram, X, Facebook, and all that stuff. Well, on Facebook, you could just Robert Edgar Mills and get to everything from there. Please give me your feedback. Please share and be good to each other, folks. Please be good to each other. Until next time, I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. Be safe.